Tim Walz has lied about the rank that he retired at, and he has lied about his service in the National Guard. Now, Democrats will frame this up, and I don't think I have a clip of Walz saying it. You can easily find that for yourself. I'm not making this up. Tim Walz will go and do the media rounds and say, how dare someone question their service, or how dare someone demean a service member? And that is not the point. We might have a clip of J.D. Vance actually saying this. We're not going after Tim Walz for 24 years in the National Guard. Hat off to him. Salute you for that. Anyone that dons the uniform to serve this country, you have my full support and respect. That being said, no one is going after Tim Walz for serving in the National Guard. People are going after Tim Walz for lying about what happened in that service. And you already caught a snippet of that with his DUI arrest saying, look, hey, police officer, I was in the National Guard, hearing sort of an issue. Maybe I can get a free pass because, hey, you're a police officer, I'm a guardsman. You can understand, you can relate to that, right? So he already tried to work around a DUI arrest by playing up his National Guard service. Let us share this thread here. It'll just be easiest to share make sure we share the right screen here. So here we go. Dustin Grage. This guy is my next door neighbor, basically, in Minnesota here. He is a fantastic follow if you are on Twitter, well connected to the Minnesota GOP, but he's done some great work with Tim Walz. And so he's going to give us a little background for all of this, and then we'll play some of the videos that are embedded as well. And like I said, Dustin is saying the same things. Tim Walz served this country honorably for 24 years. Regardless of party, this alone deserves recognition and celebration. Absolutely no disagreement there. Thank you for your service, Tim Walz, in the National Guard. It is what happened once he left the National Guard and how he left the National Guard, we'll get to that in just a second, that it becomes an issue. So I'm going to play, this is a good ad with some overview, and I've got the specific videos that we can play on our own here. Again, take a listen. Let us know what's wrong.
Tim Walz wants to be a heartbeat away from Commander-in-Chief, but Tim Walz has lied about his military record for years.
He's used the rank that he never achieved in order to advance his political career.
Walz lied repeatedly about his rank.
Retired Command Sergeant Major. Retired Command Sergeant Major. Command Sergeant Major. Retired Command Sergeant Major.
Walz lied about being in combat.
Can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war,
Walz dodged deployment by retiring when he knew his National Guard unit was going to Iraq.
Everybody knew they were going to train and go to Iraq. The warning order basically stated it, and too much later after he knew it, that's when he retired.
Walz disparaged Minnesota National Guard soldiers.
Mayor said, I request the National Guard. We're going to have massively trained troops. No, you're going to have 19-year-olds who are cooks.
That same Minnesota National Guard that he disparaged, unlike Walz, served heroically in Iraq and Afghanistan. Tim Walz is not fit to be anywhere near the office of Commander-in-Chief. Tim Walz is guilty of stolen valor.
A felony, by the way. Those keeping score at home, Donald Trump's a felon. Well, all those court cases are getting thrown out, but Tim Walz violated the Stolen Valor Act of 2005, which would make him a felon if found guilty. And one of the things that's interesting in this video, because this is not what else we're going to talk about, but they pointed out that he disparaged National Guard troops, saying you got these young kids that are cooks. For all of the suckers and losers, commentary, narratives, propaganda, is what it is about Donald Trump saying, he disparaged the military. Donald Trump doesn't respect the military. The Vanessa Guillen story where he didn't want to pay $60,000 for some effing Mexican's funeral. All lies, by the way. The family has come out and said that's an absolute lie. For all those stories about Donald Trump hating the military, let's just remember that Tim Walz made that comment, calling them all cooks, just cooks. Donald Trump was also the most pro-peace president of our lifetime. No new wars. A safer world abroad. And I don't care about world respect. Democrats love to point out, like, oh, nobody respected Donald Trump on the world stage. I don't care about that. Number one, he was respected. You didn't see any aggression from Putin or Xi or Kim Jong-un. So he had their respect. But I don't care what world leaders think about us because we are Americans. This is America. I want a president to focus on America first. Hence the America First movement. Forget fighting for freedom all over the world. Some people don't want freedom. Freedom doesn't work for everybody. Systems of government work for different cultures and religions. It's not our job to go police the world. I want to focus on America. So Donald Trump, most pro-peace president, already speaks volumes for what he thinks about troops because he's not sending them overseas to get needlessly killed in the service of the military-industrial complex, big oil, what have you, regime building over there. All right, so powerful ad there. Dustin Grage continues on his thread. Tim Walz's story begins in 2004 outside a Bush rally in Mankato, Minnesota. He claimed he was denied entry. Again, lies upon lies. He claims he was denied entry, but in reality, he was simply there to protest a Bush visit. Bush was speaking in Mankato on a college campus, I think. So Walz took a few students. All right, good job, partisan education system in Minnesota. Takes a few students to go protest George W. Bush. And by the way, this is the same George W. Bush that Democrats are courting. They already have Dick and Liz Cheney. Dick Cheney, vice president under George Bush, who was basically a Hitlerian Darth Vader for 8 years while he was vice president. He's now endorsed Kamala Harris, and they're saying that's a good thing. And they also want George W. Bush to endorse Kamala Harris. You can't make this up. Tim Walz, 20 years ago, was protesting George Bush because he was getting kids killed in the desert, and now they are desperate to get this neocon support because Donald Trump is a threat to the establishment uniparty's stranglehold on power. If I had told you 20 years ago that this dude protesting here would be running for vice president, and the person he was protesting would now be the same person he wants to get an endorsement from, if you're voting Democrat and you're old enough to have voted in 2000 and 2004, and you were just like, I can't vote for George Bush, he's Hitler. You want George's endorsement now. I don't know what else to tell you. All right, this video is pretty interesting as well. This has been around for a while. I think this video came out in the early 2010s, but someone confronted Tim Walz way back then about stolen valor, pointing out the fact that, hey, Walz, you repeatedly said that you were in Afghanistan with Operation Enduring Freedom. Turns out you were in Italy. Look, we're not disparaging Tim Walz's service. You usually don't get to decide where you're deployed. Some people get deployed to Afghanistan, others get deployed to Italy. It is all important in this web of support. That being said, you don't get to claim service in Afghanistan if you didn't go to Afghanistan, and that is the point. No one is calling out Tim Walz for serving admirably for 8 months overseas in Italy. They're calling him out for lying about that service here. So we'll play just a little bit. This is a 3-minute video, but here is someone confronting his staff.
My name is Dave Phil. This is Travis Quinlan. We're both constituents and Iraq war vets. We're hoping to talk to someone about a photograph I have on for the walls.
Okay.
Not sure if you have ever seen this picture before.
Mm-mm.
Okay. Well, in it depicts 2004 Afghanistan veteran.
Right.
Congressman Walz is not an Afghanistan war veteran, is he?
He served in Italy as part of Operation Enduring Freedom.
Okay, but he didn't serve in Afghanistan, did he?
Not that I'm aware of.
I guess I've always referred to it as, he's called up and served in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. Okay, so is there any question in your mind what Enduring Freedom is? No. Okay, so I guess most people, and yourself included, would associate Enduring Freedom with Afghanistan.
Right, but
Okay.
I mean, I think it, as I also understand that it encompasses a great deal, and there.
Well,
Okay, so you get the idea there. Continuing on. While Walz, I'm continuing with Dustin's thread here on Twitter. While Walz is not an Operation Enduring Freedom veteran, he has tried to correct this error over the years. Okay, so again, giving Walz some benefit of the doubt, acknowledging that Walz is trying to correct the narrative. He later claimed he deployed to Italy in, quote, support of Operation Enduring Freedom. The only problem is the Department of Defense does not recognize Italy as a deployment in support of OED. So even as Walz backtracked, he didn't backtrack far enough. He said, I was in Italy to support OED. But the government, the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, they said, hold on a second, that doesn't exactly qualify as supporting that mission in Afghanistan. All right, so while Walz oversaw a battalion that deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, he personally did not. More on that in just a second. Walz doesn't have a GWOTE because Italy isn't recognized. He never earned the hardware and is actively claiming the valor of his men to this day. In addition to Walz committing stolen valor over his misrepresentations of OEF, he also misrepresented his rank for decades, claiming rank of Command Sergeant Major retired. Of course, the only problem with that, and again, we have government documents verifying this, he never retained that rank. So Tim Walz served while he was active as Command Sergeant Major. However, I wonder if we can make this a little bit bigger here. He was administratively reduced to Master Sergeant in E8, not the E9 like he claimed, Command Sergeant Major, because he did not complete all required U.S. Army Sergeant's Major Academy coursework. That's a direct quote from the Minnesota National Guard. Tim Walz served in that rank, and this is how he was trying to thread the needle. I'm a Command Sergeant Major, but do you remember the video clips? He said retired. He didn't retire as Command Sergeant Major because he retired from the National Guard to avoid going over to Iraq and instead focus on his congressional campaign. Now, timelines also don't add up. Tim Walz would have known in the fall of 2004 his unit would be deployed. He committed to staying with his troops in February and March of 2005, saying, I am running for office, but I'm committed to staying with my battalion. I'll deploy if necessary, because look, he's in a majority Republican district that plays well with majority Republican voters. I might have a D behind my name, but I'm in the National Guard, and I'm going to serve admirably with them and honorably and deploy if called upon. And then after they get deployed, he retires. And so big problem with that as well. All right, there's a supercut of Tim Walz claiming the rank of Command Sergeant Major for 5 straight minutes. We're going to skip that. This is not AI generated. These are clips of Tim Walz saying it himself. Even at the DNC convention, an image was used to introduce Tim Walz with the rank of Command Sergeant Major. At the DNC, they're still promoting that. But again, as we pointed out, he didn't retire at that rank because he left abruptly with the National Guard before he was able to complete all the required coursework. And here we go. I think I've got this video queued up separately. This is where he's claiming weapons of war, and this video has gone viral for good reason, because very clearly Tim Walz suggests that he was in Afghanistan, carried weapons of war, which means you would be active on the ground. Let's take a listen here.
We can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at. And we,
unless Italy was a hot zone for OEF, that's just a straight up lie. He didn't carry weapons of war in Afghanistan like he wants you to believe there. Take a listen to this one, though.
when I was in Afghanistan, you know what our troops were worried about? They were worried about their families' health care.
I'll play it again.
When I was in Afghanistan,
all right, so we very clearly outlined the case that Tim Walz was never in Afghanistan. According to the Pentagon, he wasn't even supporting the efforts in Afghanistan. But when I was in Afghanistan, boy, Tim Walz didn't realize that the media scrutiny would get to him. He had a D behind his name. They don't do that. All right, let's see what else we can do here. I think we're going to finish with the thread there. And then take a look at this headline here. I'm going to go to Politico. Let us see here. I think we got to remove this for a second. There we go. We are on Politico now. And if you think this is just a right-wing talking point, you think, well, yeah, he said all those on videos, but I'm still not convinced. This is Harris's own campaign website, as reported by Politico. This is not a Trump-friendly outfit whatsoever. I'm going to read the headline. Harris campaign tweaks Walz biography amid scrutiny of military credentials. The update comes a day after Republicans escalated attacks on his record in the Army National Guard, accusing Walz of inflating his rank at retirement. Yes, they accused, and yes, they were correct. Walz inflated his rank at retirement. He did not retire as an E9 Command Sergeant Major. He didn't. The Minnesota National Guard confirmed that. So here's how Politico covers this. Kamala Harris's presidential campaign updated its online biography of running mate Tim Walz's military service amid Republican efforts to question his record in the Army National Guard. Notice how even though Politico, they're going to debunk Tim Walz's lies, but they still have to frame this up as like, oh, Republicans are going after his record. We should all be going after his record. He's lying about what he achieved in the military. I don't know if it gets scummier than that. Look, we've outlined all of Tim Walz's lies in well over an hour now, from as small as lying about not knowing how to cook food or prepare food to as large now about lying about your military service record. But even the Harris campaign knows this is a big deal. Take a listen to this. Again, continuing on Politico. On its website, the Harris campaign acts to reference to Walz as a retired Command Sergeant Major, and now it says that he once served at the Command Sergeant Major rank, a small change that nonetheless reflects his true rank at retirement from the Army National Guard. That's what I just said. And Politico said the same thing. He served in that role, but he did not retire in that role. He didn't carry weapons of war. He didn't serve in Afghanistan. He didn't retire as a Command Sergeant Major. None of that is true, and he has claimed all of it in the past while running for public office, in public service. Yes, public service indeed. Nothing like getting taxpayer money to fund your salary and retirement pensions and lying about it the entire time. But there you go, folks. Stolen valor in a nutshell there. None of it is true. None of what he is saying is true. And here's JD Vance going to town on Tim Walz. And again, maybe you don't like Tim. Maybe you don't like JD Vance if you're going to vote Democrat or thinking about voting Democrat because JD Vance, I'm already got a little JDS arrangement syndrome. But take a listen to this. Tell me if JD Vance is wrong. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself. Is JD Vance wrong about any of this?
And on the question of when he left the National Guard, he filed his election paperwork February 10th, 2005. That was a month before the National Guard even announced that it was possible that they would deploy to Iraq, and it ended up being 2 months. He retired 2 months before they actually got the paperwork.
But on CNN last night, Dana, one of the people who was actually in charge of him said they knew they were going to deploy to Iraq in February of 2004, fall of 2004. So he knew he was going to Iraq. He decided to quit, to retire, whatever word you want to use.
Retire.
Because he wanted to run for Congress. He lied about that. He said that when he decided to retire, he did not know that he was going to Iraq. That is another untruth, as even his senior military officer said. So again, I'm not criticizing the service. I'm criticizing the dishonesty. Dishonesty spoken in favor and for the purpose of political benefit. And I think that the most important thing here, Dana, is it goes to Kamala Harris's judgment. Tim Walz is ultimately going to be the vice president. Kamala Harris is in great health. I'm sure she's going to be president if she wins for 4 or maybe even 8 years. Why did Kamala Harris choose a person who has lied about their military service? I think that is a serious lapse in judgment. And I don't want to hear from a campaign spokesperson of Kamala Harris. I want to hear Kamala Harris herself address what I just said.
You know, I've seen a lot of statements from veterans, including those you serve with, saying it's just untoward to be criticized.
Okay, so here they come again with this talking point. We've got to lay this to bed once and for all, lay it to rest. Here's Dana Bash coming back on top of JD Vance's perfect rebuttal to all the lies JD Vance has been telling and campaigning on. And she wants to come back to this idea of, but you're questioning someone's military service. How can you do that? How can you disparage their service? Look, folks, JD Vance is going to say the same thing. I'm going to say it right here. Nobody legitimate is calling out Tim Walz for serving in the National Guard. That is simply not true. There is a difference between calling out Tim Walz's service in the National Guard and calling out Tim Walz's lies about his service in the National Guard. That is a huge distinction. That is the only distinction. Listen to Dana Bash, though, once again, trying to reset your framework and say, oh, wait a second, there's a question about Tim Walz's military service. You can't talk about that. You're disparaging someone. No, just no.
Somebody who served for 24 years.
Dana, I'm not interested in the ad hominem. I've heard from a lot of veterans groups who criticize Tim Walz. The question is, he said he served in war, and he didn't. That is a dishonesty. I really...
That is it. He said he served in war, and he didn't. End of discussion. We're not talking about him being in the National Guard. We're talking about him saying what he did when he was in the National Guard. I honestly don't understand this point that Dana Bash is trying to make. She is clearly a smart woman. I don't think she is that dense to not be able to figure this out, to make that distinction. She must understand that we're not calling him out for serving. We're calling him out for lying about his service, what he did when he was in the National Guard. She's a smart woman. She must understand this. And the average Democrat voter out there, I don't think you're completely clueless or helpless. I think you're able to see that, right? Like, please let me know in the comments below, my Democrat friends, like, do you see the difference between talking about someone's military service and talking about what they said about their military service? I can't make this any more clear than that. But is that where we're at? Like, are we unable to make that distinction? Like, sometimes I wonder that. Let me know in the comments.
I couldn't care less what one or the other person says about it. I care about what the truth is. The truth is that Tim Walz didn't tell the truth. And importantly, Dana, this is about Kamala Harris's judgment. And I think that when you ask, why has Kamala Harris allowed the border to be wide open? Why has Kamala Harris supported policies that have promoted the increase in inflation? I think it goes to the heart of her judgment. And I think that
I think this is a great point, unrelated to breaking down the lies of Tim Walz, but picking Tim Walz as your running mate, like, that is a huge comment on Kamala Harris herself. Now, we could speculate why she didn't pick Josh Shapiro. There's lots of rumors out there. What kind of base is she pandering to or trying to ignore, not upset? But she chose Tim Walz. Like, you had Gavin Newsom, who He's got the hair gelled back. He's ruining California more than Tim Walz. I think Tim Walz is competing with Gavin Newsom with some of the policies they're pushing out. But Gavin Newsom is certainly more popular than Tim Walz. And you'd be like, oh, but Gavin Newsom was a hypocrite during his COVID lockdowns. Like, he still went to restaurants, or he still sent his kids to private schools, even though he didn't let the public school kids go in person. Like, but Tim Walz has that same nonsense too with COVID. So I don't know if that's the issue. You wonder if he declined the nomination. Gretchen Whitmer would have been popular. They would have had the 2 women on the ticket. I think they were probably afraid of losing more male voters. So she ended up picking Tim Walz, who is just an awful candidate. And he's a serial liar, like this headline is showing here. Like, we haven't even covered all the lies, but they're everywhere. And if we wanted to, we could play a clip from Tim Walz at just a debate rally last night or his latest speech, and we could pick any random part, say, Todd, can you talk about this 1 minute of Walz speaking? And I think we could point out lies. Like, it's just everywhere. But she picked him. Kamala Harris picked Tim Walz. But let's move on here. We got Tim Walz. I think let's finish up this Stolen Valor segment with him trying to get in front of it, as it were. Boy, we've played a lot of clips of Kamala trying to defend her policies, and she just turns into a bumbling mess. This one might win prizes.
Been in war, but you have never deployed actually in a war zone. A campaign official said that you misspoke. Did you?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly proud. I've done 24 years of wearing the uniform of the.
Stop right there. The question was, you lied about weapons of war. Your campaign said you misspoke. We have already ended the conversation about we're not talking about your service. But what does Tim Walz say very first? I'm proud of my 24 years. We're all proud of it, Tim. We're not proud of the fact that you lied about what you did in there. Like, enough of this. Enough of this. Who does this play to?
This country. Equally proud of my service in a public school classroom, whether it's Congress or the governor. My record speaks for itself, but I think people are coming in to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my.
Candidly is not the same thing as lying blatantly. He lied about his service to win in a Republican majority district when he first ran for Congress in 2005. He didn't misspeak. He intentionally lied.
My emotions on my sleeves, and I speak especially passionately about our children being shot in schools and around. Not related about shooting kids in schools. And short of confiscating every single firearm in the country, these people have never put forward an actual plan that would keep kids safe. They just don't have it. Nobody wants kids killed. Nobody wants a gun-free America when all you have to do is look at what some of the policies coming out of Washington, D.C. look like and go back in time a little bit to say they always disarm the populations. I think we've got to do a separate gun control story. Yeah, you don't have to like an assault weapon, which is not a real term. You don't have to be afraid of it, but you should definitely not like what other governments have done in the past when they took away all of the guns from their populace. And you know who's still going to have guns besides the government? Criminals. Criminals will still have guns. They're just trying to come after law-abiding citizens who do not hurt other people with those guns. So I think people know me. They know who I am. They know where my heart is. And again, my record has been out there for over 40 years to speak for itself.
And the idea that you said that you were in war.
Did
you misspeak as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar is not always correct. But again,
my grammar is not always correct. That he actually said that. So flashback to the debate with J.D. Vance, and he's up there looking just panicked about, I don't know how to explain this China story. I said what I said. Can you move on, please? Like, he was just desperate for the camera to pan away from him. And here he said, my wife pointed out that I have an issue with grammar sometimes. Like, folks, are we buying this? And you can't just say, like, well, Donald Trump lies too. I'm asking you to confront all of Tim Walz's lies. I'm asking you to confront his complete non-answers. Complete non-answer. He was asked 2 times by Dana Bash in this clip here. You talked about carrying weapons of war in Iraq. You're accused of violating the Stolen Valor Act, of committing stolen valor. How will you persuade Americans that they can trust you on other issues? How can you come clean to the American people? Because you're busted, Tim Walz. You're completely busted on this lie. And he can't do it. Folks, how is this okay?
if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my dog.
No, well, I don't even have time to get into it. We should have covered the dog story too. Yeah, he apparently has multiple dogs named Scout. It's just everything, folks. He lies about everything.